In this video, we're going to engage the world of the text. As you'll often hear me say in this course, exegesis is a thing that is best learned by actually doing it. And that's the case with learning generally, but particularly with exegesis. We're developing different skill sets. You learn those skills by actually doing them and utilizing them. That being the case, we're going to have several different lecture pauses in this video. So if you are not in a place right now where you can sort of engage these lecture pauses, I'd encourage you to hold back on this video and maybe come back to it when you're at home or when you're in a place where you can do some writing and do some thinking on your own. I will, of course, be doing some talking at you in this video, but there's going to be a couple different times where I'm asking you to actively engage things and practicing the skill set of literary analysis of a text, which is sort of key to engaging the world of the text. And we're going to even start here with a lecture pause by retrieving some information, by doing some recall. If you remember, sort of the best way, one of the best ways to implant memories or to implant learning in your mind is by recalling information, not by sort of looking at it, but by not by putting it into your mind, but by pulling it out of your mind. And so I want you to recall what we did, what we sort of introduced last week with respect to the hermeneutical circle. So pause the video here, open up that file of lecture pauses or grab that notebook of lecture pauses if you're handwriting. And in about a paragraph or so, I want you to recall and write one paragraph explaining what the hermeneutical circle is. All right, now that you all have done that, let's go ahead and go back to our hermeneutical circle. Remember, it's best when we retrieve information to have that information either confirmed or corrected. So when we're talking about the hermeneutical circle, we're talking about a sort of heuristic or a method for doing exegesis that consists of three different worlds: the world of the text, which we're addressing in this video, the world in front of the text, which we talked about last week with particular reference to our lived experiences and our social location, and then the world behind the text, which we'll move to and introduce next week. And remember, this is called the hermeneutical circle because you can sort of jump into any one of these three worlds to start. That you start engaging in one of those worlds, you move to the next one, you move to the next one, and you continue to go about that process. And your understanding of a given passage or text is going to continue to develop as you continuously engage those worlds in this sort of infinite circle. It implies that exegesis is never something that is a sort of finished project, finished product that you're completely done with. You could return to a passage however many times, and your understanding of it is going to continually change as you change as a person and as your knowledge about the world of the text and the world behind the text change. So what we're going to do in this video is really engage and introduce some of the elements of the world of the text. What you'll also hear called literary analysis. Elements of detailed analysis are going to be sort of engaged when we're engaging the world of the text. Things like textual criticism, literary criticism, narrative criticism, these words that you hear that are all related to a passage itself or to the genre of a passage itself is what we're talking about when we're talking about the world of the text. So what we're going to do here is sort of lay out some of the different ways that we're going to engage the world of the text. And sort of to give you a fair warning, we'll be learning these skill sets of the different worlds as the semester progresses. So this is not by any means the last time that we're going to engage the world of the text. And in this video, we're not going to sort of introduce every single skill set that's related to the world of the text. We're going to sort of put some of them out there, and we'll be returning to them as the semester progresses. So one of the ways that we engage the world of the text, and you see this, there's a whole section of this in Michael Gorman's book that you're reading for this week, is identifying the literary form. And this is with respect to the biblical book that you're engaging as a whole, in our case, Revelation, identifying Revelation as an apocalypse and as prophecy. We'll talk more about that later on. We're not engaging those questions quite yet. We'll return to that aspect of the world of the text later on. So identifying the literary form of the book as a whole. So with Revelation, we're talking about apocalypse. With Pauline literature, we're talking about letters. With the Gospels, we're talking about Gospels. And with Catholic letters, where we're again talking about letters. With Acts, we're talking sort of about a historical narrative. So identifying the literary form of the New Testament text as a whole, but then also understanding if the particular passage that you're exegeting, that you're dealing with, usually somewhere around 10 verses, if it is sort of a sub form or a sub genre contained within the larger genre. Is it a prayer? Is it a narrative? Is it an exhortation? So identifying the larger literary form and then the more sort of specific literary form. And you're going to see that as we talk about the world of the text, this idea of engaging something larger and then something more immediate is something that we're going to do more than once. So it's not just with respect to with literary form, but also with respect to things like outlining or the literary context. So when you're looking at your particular passage, your particular 10 verses or so that you are working on exegeting, it's always important to know what comes before it and what comes after it. How is it situated within, how is your passage situated within the context of the document as a whole? And I want to give us some practice with this with respect to one of Revelation's sort of most famous or most celebrated passages because of that number 666 in Revelation 13:18. So you can either do this lecture pause with respect to this passage right here, or if you have a passage that you have sort of started getting moving on, or that you think you might be interested in writing your exegetical paper on, you can do this. You can do this exercise, this lecture pause, with respect to that passage. But if you don't have one of those yet, I'm going to be working with Revelation 13 here, and we can sort of work together to draw out some things about the passage. So what I want you to do in this lecture pause is summarize the previous context, and I want you to write these things down either digitally or in your notebook. Summarize the previous context, summarize the following context. So we're thinking previous, following, and then how your particular passage fits into that context. And if you can write in a sentence or two, this is how Revelation 13:11-18 fits in this context, what it's doing there, that being able to clearly articulate something like that goes a really long way to helping your thinking, but also as you go to write a paper, to clearly articulating how you are interpreting a passage. So again, let's go ahead and pause right here and go ahead and write down in a sentence or two the previous context before Revelation 13. And you can sort of go as far back as you need to go. And then the following context into Revelation 14, sort of going down as far as you need to go. And then think about how Revelation 13:11-18 sort of fits within those two contexts, the previous and the following context. So when I go about this task, I find that if I were to summarize Revelation chapter 12, sort of I would do it for this exercise, summarize Revelation chapter 12, summarize Revelation chapter 14. So I'm not going to go any earlier than 12. I'm not going to go any later than 14. If you did, that's great. No problem at all. So in Revelation chapter 12, we have the defeat of the dragon in heaven. So the dragon's sort of already defeated in the cosmic realm, and is sort of cast down to earth, chases the woman down to earth, and is pursuing her. And then as the dragon sort of moves in, or this account of the dragon being cast down moves into Revelation chapter 13, we then have sort of a movement from this dragon, who is the enemy of God and is defeated by the archangel Michael and his angels. We then have sort of authority handed over. So the arch nemesis changes from the dragon to the first beast in Revelation 13, verses 1 through 10. And then once we actually get to Revelation 13:11, notice we have another beast. So we have a second beast, and if we count the dragon as a beast, really we're on our third beast here in just these two chapters. And then so it's within that it's here that we get this account of the second beast in verses 11 through 18, and the sort of identifying mark or the identifying number of the second beast in Revelation 13:18, famously the number 666. And so then when we move into Revelation 14, we sort of get this contrast from the dragon, the first beast, and the second beast in Revelation chapter 13 to a different kind of beast or a different kind of animal with the portrayal of the lamb in Revelation chapter 14. And the lamb the lamb being part of this new loud song that is being sung in Revelation 14. So whereas in Revelation 12 and 13, you have this sort of chaotic war. In Revelation 14, you have this transition to something that's a little bit that's more calm, that's more praiseworthy. So if I were to sort of state how Revelation 13:11 through 18 fits in the context of what precedes and what comes after, I would say something like Revelation chapter 13 verses 11 through 18 continues in a series of different enemies of God and God's people before transitioning to a serene portrayal of the lamb and the song in Revelation chapter 14. So that's one part of engaging the world of the text, identifying the literary context that comes before and that comes after. And this really moves into something that we'll do later on in the semester. We're going to sort of circle back to the world of the text with respect to outlining later on in the semester. And outlining is going to engage things like the preceding and the following context, but it's also going to ask you to engage specifically your passage and create an outline of the passage at hand. So usually when you're outlining, sort of when you name that preceding and that following context, you're doing that in in one or 2 points for each. And then when you're getting into your passage itself, you're getting a little bit into the nitty gritty of the details of your particular text. So outlining is going to be very much related to identifying the literary context. And outlining is also going to involve close reading. It's really, in a way, it's a way to sort of guide and visualize your own close reading of a text. But a close reading is going to engage other things besides just creating an outline. One of the things that we do when we engage a close reading, and I suggest always sort of printing out a text when you start doing a close reading and physically marking it so that you can draw connections and you can having wide margins so you can sort of draw call outs to your thoughts. But one of the things we do in this close reading is sort of marking the text for historical and cultural features that you notice in the text, that you notice them maybe because they're unfamiliar to you and you think, if I knew more about this concept or this term culturally and historically, I'd be able to make better sense of this passage. And then you can sort of go to the other tools that we're going to talk more about, things like commentaries and Bible dictionaries that are going to give you more information about those historical and cultural features, so that you're really engaging and marking these in order to get more information about them. And this is moving towards the world behind the text that we'll really address and reintroduce again next week. And so as you're also marking the text in your close reading, one of the things that you might want to mark is literary features. And again, Michael Gorman in the reading for this week is going to list a whole lot of different kinds of literary features when he talks about the detailed analysis of the text. But some of these might include sort of repeated words. When something is repeated often, it's a clue that it's very important for your particular passage. And then if you see that same thing repeated sort of throughout the given New Testament book, it's an even stronger clue that for this particular author, this idea, theme, or word is particularly important. You might also mark things like Old Testament citations or allusions. This is a place where a study Bible is going to be really, really helpful for you. Things like metaphors or different structural patterns that you find in a text. So once again, the best way to learn exegesis, to learn how to do this kind of thing, is to actually do it. So I have not asked you to print Revelation 13, 11 through 18, but what I'll ask you to do is, again, we'll do a lecture pause here, and I want you to, on your own, once again, read through Revelation 13, 11 through 18, our same text, and identify two commonly repeated words that you notice. If you were doing this with a physical text, you could be outlining or underlining or circling, but in this case, one is going to pop out to you right away, and then some others will sort of be more on the periphery. There's one word that is particularly repeated and others that are repeated a handful of times. So go ahead and pause right here. This should take you just a handful of minutes and identify two commonly repeated words in the passage. All right, so presumably you found that beast is is the most commonly repeated word in this passage, and really in this entire section. If we move back in the previous context of Revelation 13 and Revelation 12, we're going to see this word beast repeated a number of times. Let's see, we have it in this select passage 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. So this is a clue that sort of the beast, or the second beast, stands sort of as the central figure of this passage. And there might have been some other, I asked you to look at for two commonly repeated words. You might have found some other ones. But what you can then do is that when you see these kinds of repetitions, this is a clue that this is a word you might want to learn more about. And in the next video for this week, we're going to look at this word a little bit more closely with respect to a word study. But another thing is that sort of when you see a repetition, if you have a contrast with something that comes in the passage as well, that is oftentimes something that's important. So one of the things that I notice when I read this passage closely and note the repetition of the word beast is at the end of it, you have this strong contrast with the word that's only used one time here, person. So you have, 10 times this figure is called a beast. And then at the end, when John calls for wisdom to calculate the number, he says it's the number of a person. So the beast, who has been characterized over and over and over again as a beast in very vivid imagery, is actually a person. And so you sort of have this this wave of beast language that then comes down on the fact that it's actually a human being, a person, or in Greek, an anthropos. And so again, identifying things like commonly repeated words are going to lead you to further engagement with that particular word or with that particular structure that you see repeated. And what we're going to do in the next video is look to tools by which you can do one, translation and translation comparison. So beast is one that's fairly consistently translated as beast across translations, but that's not the case with all words. Of course, that different translations are going to take a particular Greek word and different translations will translate it different ways. And so being able to compare what different translations do with a particular word or a particular phrase can be of much value. But what we're going to really focus in on the next video is using tools. I'm going to show you some tools for doing word studies, and we're going to sort of get our hands dirty with a word study of beast before Greek exegesis students. Your assignment for this week will be to do your own word study of a word that is important to your passage or a word that you find of interest from some other passage in Revelation.